While re-implementing the paint mechanics from our student game Tag the Power of Paint, in the context of Portal 2, the biggest change we made was to exclude the paint gun. In Tag, our paint gun allowed the player to paint the environment freely in an abstract outdoor environment, but in our gameplay experiments, that was very difficult to constrain without contrivance in Portal 2's indoor spaces. It also changed the game's pacing significantly, since being able to run at high speed around a level covering everything in paint is a lot more fast-paced, energetic, and often scattershot than Portal's more cerebral gameplay. Perhaps most importantly, there's a certain elegance in the simplicity of manipulating all the game elements using only the portal gun. Adding a new gun would inherently add complexity and force us to start from square one training the player how to use this new tool instead of focusing on the game's namesake. Instead, we decided to use the established mechanism of the delivery tubes and have players redirect the flow of the paint with their portal guns. This felt like a good compromise.
One of the things that the student game Tag the Power of Paint didn't allow was painting of other objects, since this would have been too trivial in that game. In Portal 2, however, moving paint around became a puzzle in and of itself, so we began to create puzzles that depended on painting objects. Bouncy boxes and turrets were an obvious choice, and adding this mechanic extended our toolbox to include objects whose basic properties of movement could be changed by the player.
On you for another round of tests. We're not going to release this stuff into the wild until it's good and damn ready, so as long as you keep yourself in top physical form, there'll always be a limo waiting for you. Say goodbye.
The newer and older versions of Aperture show their distinct personalities in sound as well as visuals. The doors, floors, and buttons, as well as soundscapes, reflect the aging, outdated 70s feel. The sounds contain hints of the decaying metal and wood. The newer but unstable Wheatley Chamber soundscapes become more foreboding and perilous the further you venture into them. The atmosphere of uncontrolled destruction continues to intensify till the end.
The character of Potatoes was actually the hardest one to crack for us, and was the last character to get recorded. We'd always wanted to switch things up for the sequel, so that Gladys would become your unwilling buddy cop partner against a new threat. But this ended up being far more entertaining as a concept than an execution. It's one thing to have an omnipotent villain chastising you while you're testing, it's quite another to have a little potato on your gun doing the same. Playtesters wanted to tear her off the gun, and we didn't blame them. So we were faced with the unsettling prospect of making dry, robotic supervillain GLaDOS more human and relatable. This ended up being one of the hardest writing jobs in the game.
The character of Carolyn came about because we wanted somebody for Cave to play off of. Though we had originally envisioned a put-upon scientist character called Greg, it would have been wasteful to hire an actor for just 1 or 2 lines. Instead, we hit upon the idea of economizing by using GLaDOS actor Ellen McLean. Out of nowhere, we suddenly had an opportunity for a GLaDOS origin story.
Propulsion gel carried over almost exactly the same as the speed paint in the student game, Tag the Power of Paint, except that it is slightly more than twice as fast. Propulsion gel combined well with the existing mechanics of Portal, such as flinging, and it also went well with the repulsion gel for long jumps. We had to tweak the player's control on propulsion gel to feel right in the Portal universe, and also added a slight funneling effect to help guide the player when they're speeding into a portal.
Portal Paint was the last paint we added to the game, and for a long time we weren't sure of the best way to use it. We experimented with the delivery method and found that it was most effective when it was deployed in large quantities. Another important factor was the angle of application. Dropping the paint at an angle allowed the player to play more freely with the paint, which gave them the liberating feeling of breaking the rules by being able to place portals where they couldn't before.
The first implementation of the blob was integrated in the source engine back in 2007. Over the years, the code has been significantly optimized, but was still way too slow to run on game consoles. The blob was a key feature of Portal 2, even though we didn't know if we could make it work for consoles. In summer 2010, we were still considering using a completely different tech for consoles, one that would certainly not look as nice. On the 360, even with a very low quality blob, we were barely within a performance budget. But we really wanted to have the same high quality blob among all platforms. Meanwhile, the code was poorly suited for PS3 SPU. We ended up rewriting all the blob code, so it will take better advantage of multiple cores and SPUs, giving us quality blobs on all platforms while staying within performance and memory constraints.
With the gel sounds for Portal 2, we wanted to create something whimsical that would add to the player's enjoyment of the mechanics, without crossing over the line into ludicrousness. For example, our initial pass at the blue gel bounce sound included a rubber playground ball, a pitch-bent harp string, and a processed mouth harp. The resulting sound captured the idea of fun, but was off the charts on the goofy scale. After several iterations, we settled on the current, less over-the-top sound, which features a piece of metal bar bouncing like a diving board, and a heavy dose of synthesis. It's not as wacky, but hopefully, it's still fun.
The Franken turrets were an attempt to show one of the ways Wheatley has been spending his time since he threw the player down into the underground. Using his limited brain, it didn't seem like he could have come up with a lot, so the idea of using objects he'd have access to seemed appropriate. The turret and the cube are the two most iconic Portal objects, and the Franken turret is little more than a crude combination of those two objects. The hermit crab animation when you pick the cubes up began as a necessity, because we really needed to make them act like cubes when you held them. It ended up being so cute that it became a simple job of making the turret widen its eye and shake its little head, to convey to the player that these things were disrupted, and had no idea who or what they were anymore, and also to make the player feel sympathetic towards their plight. We used a combination of in-game physics pushes and canned Maya animation to allow the player freedom to move them wherever they wanted, line up races between them, or even set them up so they would walk, inevitably, to their doom, into a fizzler.
Clear meltdown imminent. I think we're in trouble.
Wheatley's first test was really fun to make because we wanted it to feel like he was the first-time level designer. We see a lot of maps where people try using different textures or lights to write words or put their names on the walls.
One of the big plot holes that Potatoes introduced was she's your buddy now, she's got the same goals as you, so why isn't she helping you solve the tests? The real answer is obviously that if she did help you solve the tests, there'd be no game left. One solution we came up with was for the bird from Act 3 to keep swooping in and pecking bits of her off your gun. As the bird kept eating the part of her that knew how to solve the tests, Potatoes would actually get dumber over time. For technical reasons, this ended up being impossible to execute, so we ended up finding another solution. Some of us, though, will always have a place in our heart for the bird solution.
Alright, so that last test was seriously disappointing.
Finding the right balance for evil Wheatley was difficult, because we still wanted him to be the bumbling idiot from the first half of the game. But at the same time, there had to be some sense that he was dangerous now. Otherwise, there wasn't much tension for the big finale. Fortunately, Stephen Merchant did a great job of intercutting funny bumbling Wheatley with occasional outbursts of power-mad villainous Wheatley.
What was that? Oh, sorry.
In each of Wheatley's test chambers there is always a monitor with Wheatley on it. While placing the monitor in this level, one of our designers thought it would be funny if the monitor was the target of the faith plate and would get broken if the player or the box flew into it. We thought the gag worked well and decided to make every monitor breakable.
A more sort of concentrated burst of science. Oh, on a related note, I am going to need you to solve these 10 times.
The original layout of this chamber started out much more linear, essentially a sequence of rooms that the player had to progress through somewhat blindly, not knowing what the next goal might be until they got there. Early versions contained an extra puzzle beyond the reflector cube, but due to the linear path, it took players so long to get to it that they were confused about which elements were still relevant. This drove us to make the level non-linear. To make it easier for players to visualize the puzzle, we condensed the overall test space and moved the exit near the start. This helped the players see where they had to go and which objects would help them get there.
We found that playtesters were getting fatigued at solving so many complex test chambers in a row. So, instead of a routine elevator ride to the next puzzle, we added a long funnel ride with some destruction to give players a short break while reminding them of the facility's state of disrepair.
Having built up the expectation that Wheatley is going to kill the player, we still wanted the actual moment to be a surprise. By this point, players are entirely comfortable with faith plates, and the simple subversion of expectations as Wheatley punts you sideways is a fun and surprising moment. We added the bouncing box with the intention that players attempt to time their jump to catch the box, focusing their attention on the expected result of their jump, and heightening the surprise.
I've got an idea. Yes, in your face, I got that.
We had a bunch of levels that used crusher panels in ways that made the test chambers more dangerous. After showing some of these levels in press demos, we got feedback that viewers were getting the impression that Portal 2 was going to be too difficult, since players would have to time events such as running or falling through a portal while avoiding getting hit by a deadly crusher. We ultimately decided to save these crushers for the escape when Wheatley tries to hold you off.
In this excursion funnel ride, playtesters would often end up shooting the wrong portal at the critical moment and killing themselves. This ruined the moment for players who often didn't quite understand why their excursion funnel hadn't been redirected. As a solution, we now detect when the player places the wrong portal in hopes of saving themselves. We help them out by moving their other portal under the excursion funnel source. This effectively makes this section foolproof by allowing the player to shoot either portal to save themselves.
When playtesting the final boss battle, we found players were confused about what to do when they entered Wheatley's lair. Our solution was to train the player by having them break glass paint pipes in the previous level. This lets them learn the mechanic without any time pressure before they have to fight Wheatley. This also trains the player to redirect the bombs Wheatley throws at them.
There was a lot of debate over how to properly punish Wheatley at the end of the game. Killing him seemed too severe given how much we'd grown to love the character. On the other hand, simply letting him out of the GLaDOS body with a slap on the wrist seemed unacceptably anticlimactic. Having him sucked out into space with a space sphere seemed like a happy middle ground that everybody could get behind.
The entire building is going to self-destruct in about 6 minutes.
Wheatley used to have different kinds of attacks other than lobbing bombs. At one point, we tried attaching several turrets to him that he could point at you. This proved too punishing, however, and they were removed. We also tried crusher panels that Wheatley could try to smash you with. This, once again, proved too punishing, since players were focused on what Wheatley was doing and would often get hit by a crusher they weren't looking at.
We wanted to be scientifically accurate in this puzzle, figuring that there'd be a slight delay before you'd see a portal on the moon, since light takes 1.4 seconds to travel the distance. But playtesters would shoot the moon and instantly turn away, thinking nothing had happened. They didn't realize they had actually shot a portal on the moon. We tried and rejected a few different approaches to communicate the effect, including a cheat involving quantum entanglement, before settling on the current solution to this problem.